Decision making in NABARD Grade A is one such section for which there is not much guidance available on YouTube. And I would say this is one of the killer sections because it is non-merit section in the phase 1, but still many people who cleared overall cutoff last year were not able to clear the sectional cutoff in decision making. So let's discuss in this video about decision making, the why, what and how part, that why we need to study decision making, what we know about decision making, what NABARD tells us about decision making, and how we can cover decision making based upon the previous year papers analysis. So let's start with the why part. Now, why do we need to do decision making is because if you see the structure of phase 1 in NABARD, there are 5 non-merit sections. Out of that, one is decision making, which is worth 10 marks, and there would be 10 questions from decision making in your exam. So that is why we need to study decision making, though it is qualifying. So this is not merit, this is qualifying, but though this is qualifying section, non-merit section, as I told you, this can still be a killer section because if you don't study about this, questions are not bookish in this section, right? Or many people don't know what to study in this section, and therefore if we do not study what is required in this section, we might fall short of the sectional cutoff in decision making. So हमें ये पढ़ना है, that is the why part. Now what do we know about decision making? So about decision making, one thing is pretty clear. Again, from the pattern that we will get 10 questions worth 10 marks. And apart from that, what NABARD has given us in the sample paper, NABARD has given us some sample questions on decision making. If you pause this video and study these sample questions, it will become pretty clear to you that these sample questions are theory based. So we are expecting that questions would be theoretical in the exam, and last year they were theoretical itself, right? So whatever NABARD gave as sample in the sample paper, that kind of questions came in the actual exam also. But the sample is just 2 questions. We could not infer much last year that what would be the exact questions, but now since we have seen the previous year paper, we can tell you that how to approach decision making section, and that is what we would be discussing in this video, right? So here I would be discussing about the approach and the sources. So in the approach part, first of all, I want to tell you that paper is very basic in nature, no complex questions. You only need to know that what you need to study. Once you have studied that, you will find that the questions are really basic in nature. Next is the breadth of topics. तो आपको बहुत ज़्यादा डेप्थ में नहीं जाना है. आई थिंक वॉट यू नीड टू फोकस ऑन इज द ब्रेड्थ ऑफ टॉपिक्स, बिकॉज इफ यू हैव रेड एवरीथिंग व्हाट इज रिक्वायर्ड, यू विल बी एबल टू सॉल्व द मैक्सिमम नंबर ऑफ क्वेश्चंस इन द एग्जाम. एंड दे डू आस्क सम questions from the fringe topics also, because when we see decision making, we tend to study only decision making as such, but then they were asking questions from leadership, questions from journal management. These terms are more related to RBI, but when it comes to decision making in NABARD, those terms become relevant here. So हम इसी की बात करेंगे अब कि what are the breadth of topics, what are the topics that I need to study, and what are the fringe topics that I need to study so that I cover decision making, I mean in the entirety. ठीक है, तो ये कुछ questions हैं which you can see. The process whereby a manager shares his work and authority with his subordinates is, right, delegation. Pretty simple question. If you would have read about this, you would easily solve this. So that is the point I was making in the previous slide, that questions are basic in nature. You need not worry much about the complexity. Just focus on covering the the breadth, right? So what all you need to study, as in the breadth of topics you need to study, first is you should have very good understanding of the basics of decision making as a process. What is the concept? What are the approaches to decision making? So last year there was one question on the basics of decision making, as in decision making is one of the basic cognitive process. This was the answer, right? So only if you know whether it is cognitive, whether it is of other kind of process, then only you will be able to answer this question. So basics को पढ़िए, decision making की approaches को पढ़िए. That is the first thing. Then types of decision making, we have programmed, non-programmed, strategic, tactical, and some other types of decision making that you should be knowing. So this is also not tough. Some basic stuff is there. Then decision making model. So we have basically economic man model and rational model of decision making. You should be very thorough with this. Again, last year there was a question from this. I think that was on the rationality. Then steps in decision making. So there are around 5 to 7 steps in the decision making. You should be knowing about them. what happens in each step, that you should also be aware of. So you should be very comfortable with that, how the decision making process goes or it evolves. Last year there was a question on this also. Then techniques, or rather approaches in decision making. So there are 4 approaches in decision making: routine approach, scientific approach, क्वांटिटेटिव अप्रोच एंड क्रिएटिव अप्रोच. अगेन इसको बेसिक पढ़ लीजिए, बहुत ज़्यादा इसमें पढ़ने वाला कुछ है नहीं. Then come techniques of decision making. This is important: quantitative and non-quantitative. So we have techniques like brainstorming, which is non-quantitative. We have techniques like game theory, which is quantitative. So you should be knowing all those techniques in decision making. Then decision making conditions. So when you make decisions, sometimes you make decisions under certainty. आप बैंक में एफडी करा रहे हैं, 6% ब्याज आएगा, यू हैव अ सर्टेनिटी दैट यू विल गेट 6% इंटरेस्ट. समटाइम्स यू डू डिसीजन मेकिंग अंडर रिस्क, that no, you have probability of various events occurring and you calculate your risk and you make your decisions. And sometimes there is total uncertainty, you don't know what will happen, so you make decisions under that circumstances also. Right here there is a concept of maxima, minima, max min, min max. So you should be knowing all that under decision making conditions. Next is decision making style. So there are some decision making styles like integrative, flexible, decisive, hierarchic. That all you should be aware of. ठीक है. So ये basic यहाँ पे जो diagram है, this is the basic of all the decision making styles on the x and y axis. Right. You need to understand that my motive is not to explain you all this. I'm just giving you what are the broader topics you need to cover. Then in the fringe topics there are many things which are related to decision making, but you may not find them in the books, like paired comparison analysis, which is used in market research, conjoint analysis, again used in market research, heuristic methods and types, Pareto analysis, decision tree. All these are very, very important in operations and somehow they are related to decision making. Apart from them, in fringe topics, you should also study little bit about motivation, leadership, journal management, communication. So if you have prepared for RBI, you would have studied all these topics once. That is more than sufficient. Otherwise, just give a brief reading of this. But these fringe topics can be really lengthy, right? Because ultimately decision making सिर्फ 10 मार्क्स का आना है, और 10 मार्क्स के लिए अगर मैं 200-300 पेज पढ़ने शुरू कर दूंगा, that won't be prudent. तो अगर आपने ये पढ़ा हुआ है पहले ये fringe topics, you can read them, otherwise you can also leave them, because ultimately the idea is to get 3-4 marks out of 10. अगर आप इसको नहीं भी पढ़ेंगे, बाकी सब कुछ पढ़ लेंगे, you can have you can meet your target of around 3 to 4 marks. तो इनमें से क्वेश्चंस आए हैं, जैसे एक लीडरशिप पे आया था, ऑटोक्रेटिक लीडरशिप पूछा था क्वेश्चन में. देन बेसिकली फंक्शंस ऑफ मैनेजमेंट है, जो प्लानिंग, ऑर्गेनाइजिंग, स्टाफिंग, उस पर क्वेश्चन आया था. 2 क्वेश्चंस आए थे पिछली बार इन फ्रिंज टॉपिक्स में से. बट अगेन आई एम टेलिंग यू, डू नॉट वेस्ट टू मच टाइम हियर, बिकॉज दिस इज नॉट द की दैट विल हेल्प यू इन योर सिलेक्शन इन NABARD, rather it is ARD and ESI. So this is what should be our approach. बेसिक लेवल पे पढ़ें लेकिन ब्रेथ कवर करें टॉपिक्स की. एंड नाउ अबाउट द सोर्सेज. व्हाट आर द सोर्सेज यू कैन यूज इन केस you are doing self preparation? Obviously in the EduTap course everything has been provided. Now source can be the same books that is used by people to study management for RBI, right? Principles of Management by L.M. Prasad is what I will recommend and not this book. But if you are reading this book, then you can follow this also. And do selective reading. Decision making के लिए you do not need to read the entire book. Be very selective. Hardly I think you need to read around 50-60 pages, that's all. Right. But if you start reading motivation, leadership, communication, etc., which are fringe topics, then maybe it will take you a lot of time. ठीक है. But selective reading कीजिएगा, and you can Google also whatever topics I told you. You can Google also to prepare for decision making. Right. So thank you guys. I hope this video will give you some direction to prepare for decision making. क्योंकि decision making के ऊपर YouTube पे, इंटरनेट पे कुछ ज़्यादा अवेलेबल नहीं है. So I hope this video will give proper guidance to you and you can kickstart your preparation for decision making. और इस non-merit section को भी अब आप काबू कर लेंगे. So thank you all. Have a nice day. Bye bye.